In the shadowed hollows of West Virginia, there lies a tale whispered only in hushed voices. A story so unsettling that even the locals avoid speaking of it aloud. For decades, a single family remained hidden from the world, their lineage twisted and bound to one another, never allowing outsiders to enter their bloodline. 3 generations lived and died under one roof, sealed off from society, their secrets locked away in decaying walls and unmarked graves. But their silence could not last forever. Strange disappearances, odd sightings in the woods, and rumors of children with uncanny features began to leak from that forgotten valley. Investigators who dared to search the place reported feeling watched, their stomachs turning at the smell of rot that clung to the land. This isn't just another urban legend. This is the story of West Virginia's darkest inbred family. 3 generations, 1 bloodline. A family that should never have existed, but did. And once you hear their story, you'll understand why so many believe the bloodline was cursed from the very beginning. Deep in the backwoods of West Virginia lies a valley untouched by time, a place where the mountains close in so tightly that sunlight barely cuts through the trees. Locals call it the Hollow, though few dare to venture inside. For decades, it has been shrouded in secrecy, a place where whispers outlast the truth. The story begins in the early 1900s, when a family moved into an isolated cabin at the edge of the hollow. They were poor, uneducated, and deeply suspicious of the outside world. To them, survival meant keeping close, keeping blood pure, and never letting outsiders interfere. At first, their isolation seemed harmless. Neighbors chalked it up to mistrust of modern ways, a stubborn refusal to accept the changing world. But soon, strange rumors began to spread. The children of the family rarely appeared in town, and when they did, their features made people look twice. Wide-set eyes, uneven jaws, twisted expressions that didn't look quite right. Some claimed the family never attended church, that they buried their dead in secret graves deep in the forest. Others whispered that screams could be heard echoing through the hollow on moonless nights. Generations passed, but the family's ways never changed. They remained locked in the cycle of their own bloodline, producing children who were bound not just by blood, but by something darker. When school teachers or social workers tried to reach out, they were met with silence, or worse, threats. The family didn't want help. They didn't want interference. They wanted only to preserve themselves, in whatever form that meant. By the 1970s, locals began avoiding the hollow altogether. Hunters refused to cross into those woods, and travelers who took wrong turns often claimed they saw figures watching them from the trees. Pale, silent, and unmoving. The authorities received reports of missing hikers, but search parties often returned empty-handed, shaken, and unwilling to talk about what they had seen. A chilling consensus began to form. There were places in West Virginia you simply didn't go, and this hollow was one of them. The family inside was no longer just reclusive. They had become something else entirely. Something unnatural. It was the fall of 1978 when the first incident officially made its way into the sheriff's reports. A young woman named Rebecca Collins, 22 years old, vanished while driving home from a late shift at a diner just outside the hollow. Her car was found abandoned on a dirt road, the driver's door open, keys still in the ignition. What struck investigators most was the silence. No footprints, no struggle, nothing to indicate where she had gone. Just an open car, headlights still flickering weakly in the night. Locals weren't surprised. They whispered that Rebecca had strayed too close to their land, that she had either been taken or had seen something she wasn't supposed to. Search parties were organized, scouring the hollow for 3 days. They found torn pieces of fabric that matched her uniform, snagged on low branches, and a shoe half buried in the mud. But there was no body, not even a trace of blood. One deputy, fresh on the job, swore he had heard something while searching the woods at night. A faint humming sound, like voices chanting, rising and falling with the wind. Others dismissed it as nerves, but the young man refused to go back into the hollow. He claimed he saw eyes, multiple pairs of them, reflecting in the dark, unblinking, watching from the trees. Weeks passed, and Rebecca was declared missing, presumed dead. But her family refused to let the case rest. Her brother, David, began his own investigation, returning to the hollow, night after night with only a flashlight and a rifle. He told friends that he found crude symbols carved into trees, circles filled with strange markings, and bones scattered near an old fire pit. Some were animal bones, but others, he said, looked human. The sheriff's office dismissed David's claims as grief-fueled paranoia, but others began to believe. The hollow wasn't just hiding a family anymore. It was hiding something darker. Rebecca wasn't the first to vanish near those woods, and she wouldn't be the last. The family inside the hollow had lived undisturbed for decades. But now, their secrets were beginning to seep into the outside world, leaving behind traces of horror that could no longer be ignored. The first real glimpse of the family came not from law enforcement, but from a traveling photographer in 1981. He had been documenting rural poverty across Appalachia when he stumbled into the hollow. What he found there was unlike anything he had ever seen. A small cluster of shacks sat rotting under the trees, patched together with rusted tin and rotting wood. Children darted between them barefoot, their faces pale and unsettling. Their features were strangely misshapen, eyes uneven, noses flattened, mouths hanging slack, as though words were impossible to form. The photographer was shaken, but managed to capture several images before being chased off by 2 men wielding axes. Later, when he developed the film, the photographs made his stomach churn. The family's faces didn't look quite human. They looked broken, twisted by generations of the same blood mixing together. Some children had the wide, vacant stares of the intellectually disabled, while others simply looked wrong, as if their bones had grown in ways they shouldn't have. Word spread quickly, though the photographs were never officially published. Locals who had long whispered about the Bloodline family now had evidence. The family was real, and they were living less than 20 miles from town. People who claimed to have encountered them described guttural sounds instead of speech, shambling gaits, and stares that lasted too long. Hunters said they heard strange, high-pitched laughter echoing through the trees, always followed by silence that was even more terrifying. But what disturbed people most was not just how the family looked, but how they lived. Stories circulated that they survived by stealing livestock, breaking into abandoned cabins, and even dragging the occasional wanderer too close to their land into the hollow, never to be seen again. Some claimed their shacks were filled with jars of preserved organs, skulls lined on shelves, and crude drawings carved into the walls, a language only they seemed to understand. The family was no longer just a rumor. They had a name, whispered by those who had seen them and lived to tell the tale. The Whitakers. 3 generations of the same bloodline, locked away from the outside world, sustained by their own twisted version of survival. And by now, locals believed the family wasn't just strange. They were dangerous. In 1984, curiosity turned into action. a small group of investigators, a journalist, a deputy, and 2 local hunters, decided to explore the hollow in search of evidence about the Whitaker family. They entered at dawn, armed with cameras, rifles, and tape recorders. At first, the woods seemed empty, nothing but the sound of crunching leaves and distant crows. But as they pressed deeper, the air grew heavier, almost suffocating. The trees closed in, and with them came an overpowering stench, a mixture of rot, waste, and something metallic, like blood. Half a mile in, they found the first sign, a crude fence of rotting branches lashed together with strips of animal hide. Beyond it, they discovered a clearing littered with bones. Some were animal, easily identified by their size and shape, but others were far smaller, far more human. The journalist photographed the scene, but before he could capture more, the deputy insisted they move on. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the sound of shuffling in the brush. Someone was watching them. They soon reached the shacks. From a distance they could see movement, figures peering through gaps in the walls, quick shadows darting between doorways. One child stood in plain sight, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, his mouth open in a soundless gasp as he stared. When the group stepped closer, a woman emerged. Her eyes were sunken, her skin pale and blotchy. She muttered incoherently, a jumble of sounds that were neither words nor cries, before retreating inside. The hunters wanted to leave. The deputy argued they should push further. Against better judgment, they entered one of the shacks. Inside, they found chaos. Broken furniture, piles of rags serving as bedding, jars filled with cloudy liquid, containing things that looked like organs, and crude drawings scrawled across the walls. Circles, spirals, and stick. Figures, some missing limbs, others with oversized eyes. It was clear this family didn't just live apart from society. They lived by a different set of rules entirely. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed against the outside wall. Then another. The group froze, realizing they weren't alone. Dozens of footsteps circled the shack, accompanied by guttural grunts and a strange, animal-like panting. The deputy raised his weapon, but it was clear. They had trespassed too far into the Whitakers' domain. The pounding on the walls grew louder, until the whole shack seemed ready to collapse. The deputy shouted for everyone to stay calm, but his voice trembled. Through the cracks, the journalist caught glimpses of faces, pale, uneven, and staring without blinking. Then came a sound none of them would forget, a chorus of voices, high-pitched and guttural, chanting in a rhythm that had no words. It was like a prayer, but broken, as though each voice was trapped between human speech and animal howl. One of the hunters, panicked, fired a shot through the wall. The chanting stopped. Silence fell. Then, slowly, something dragged itself across the floor outside, scraping like bone against wood. The smell of rot intensified. When the deputy opened the door, shotgun raised, he froze. Lying in the dirt was not an animal, but a human hand, pale, bloated, severed at the wrist. Yet there was no blood, just the hand, twitching, as if it were still alive. The group stumbled back, but the journalist's camera clicked furiously. In the chaos, he noticed something even more horrifying. The drawings on the walls weren't just crude shapes. They were records. Generations of the same family tree repeating over and over, the same names carved beside one another. Mothers marrying sons, sisters bearing the children of brothers, fathers marked as both parent and grandfather. The bloodline wasn't just close. It was collapsing in on itself. Then came the scream, high, piercing, and unmistakably human, but not from outside. It came from beneath their feet. One of the hunters spotted a hatch under the bedding, half covered with rags. Against their better judgment, they pulled it open. A wave of foul air burst forth, and beneath, in a dirt pit, were 3 figures crouched in the dark. Their eyes reflected the lantern light like animals. Their limbs twisted unnaturally, skin blotched and scarred, mouths opening and closing as they hissed. The deputy slammed the hatch shut, but the damage was done. The family wasn't just watching from outside. They were everywhere. Above, around, and below. The Whitakers had lived in those shacks for 3 generations, but underground. There was something far worse waiting. Something the outside world was never meant to see. The hatch slammed shut with a dull thud, but the sound only seemed to enrage whatever lived beneath it. From below came pounding fists, guttural screams, and a sickening scratching, like nails tearing into wood. The shacks outside erupted with movement, doors slamming, feet stomping, and voices wailing in unison. The small group realized they were surrounded. The deputy barked for everyone to move. They bolted from the shack, stumbling into the clearing. Shapes emerged from the trees, figures with crooked gaits, their heads lolling unnaturally, eyes wide and glowing in the moonlight. The family was larger than they had imagined, dozens of them, spanning children, adults, and elderly, all with distorted features that looked more monstrous than human. One of the hunters fired his rifle into the air, the echo ripping through the woods. The family didn't scatter. They closed in, slowly, deliberately, their guttural sounds rising into a chilling chant. The journalist snapped photos desperately, knowing this was evidence no one could ignore. But the camera's flash only seemed to provoke them further. A woman lunged forward, her mouth open wide, revealing teeth filed down to jagged points. The deputy fired, dropping her instantly, but more stepped over her body without hesitation. The group fled into the woods, their flashlights cutting shaky paths through the dark. Behind them, the sounds grew louder, not just footsteps, but shrieks, laughter, and guttural howls. The journalist tripped, nearly tumbling into a ravine, but the deputy yanked him back. They pressed on, hearts pounding, lungs burning, the family always just a few steps behind. Then came the worst sound yet, a child's laughter, impossibly close, echoing through the trees. The journalist swung his light and froze. A small figure stood ahead on the path, head tilted, mouth hanging open in a grotesque smile. Its eyes reflected the light like glass. For a moment, no one moved. Then the child opened its mouth and let out a sound. Not a laugh, not a cry, but something inhuman, guttural, and piercing. Instantly the woods erupted again. The family had closed the trap. The deputy fired into the air again, screaming for the others to run. There was no longer any illusion of safety. In that moment, one thing became horrifyingly clear. You didn't escape the hollow. You survived only if the family allowed it. By the time the survivors stumbled out of the hollow, dawn was breaking over the ridgeline. Their clothes were torn, their faces streaked with mud and sweat, and their eyes wide with shock. They didn't speak as they reached the road where their truck was parked, too consumed by the horrifying images seared into their minds. The deputy swore he would never set foot in those woods again. The journalist, clutching his camera, knew he had captured something that no one outside would ever believe. Back in town, their accounts were fragmented and frantic. The sheriff dismissed most of it as fear-fueled exaggeration, but when the photographs were developed, the truth couldn't be denied. Grainy images showed misshapen faces peering from the shacks, crooked figures standing in the tree line, and, most disturbing of all, the crude family tree etched into the walls. The evidence confirmed what locals had whispered for decades: 3 generations, 1 bloodline, and a family that had turned inward until there was nothing human left. Yet despite this, nothing was done. Officials knew the hollow was dangerous, but there was no political will to interfere. The family was left to their land, their shacks rotting deeper into the earth, their bloodline festering in secrecy. Hunters warned their children never to go near. Truckers refused to drive that road at night, and locals simply erased the hollow from their maps. It became a dead zone, a place everyone knew existed, but no one dared to enter. The journalist tried to publish his findings, but his editors refused. The story was too grotesque, too unbelievable. He was accused of fabricating evidence, and eventually, his photographs vanished into private collections, traded like forbidden artifacts. Over time, the survivors stopped talking about what happened, but the whispers never faded. Even now, people claim to hear screams for the woods on moonless nights. Drivers report seeing figures standing motionless at the roadside, watching with pale, unblinking eyes. And when hikers go missing in that part of West Virginia, some locals simply shake their heads and mutter the same warning: they wandered too close to the hollow. The Whitakers remain, hidden in their decaying shacks, bound by a curse of their own making. 3 generations, 1 bloodline, and a secret that will never truly die.